The celebration was perfect on the surface. The lights glittered like diamonds, the clinking of champagne glasses echoed through the grand hall, and I could hear congratulatory laughter rippling through the crowd. My family owned company had just landed the biggest merger of its history, and tonight was meant to be my night. Yet, despite the glamour and applause, something felt off. Call it intuition or years of living with a husband who hid his emotions too well. But Ryan was tense, and that tension clung to him like a shadow. He had planned the party, of course, sparing no expense. The ballroom was adorned with gold accents, and the air smelled faintly of roses, my favorite flowers. But while Ryan flitted between guests, offering them his winning smile, I noticed how his eyes darted toward Max, my younger brother, who stood in the corner nursing a whiskey he hadn't touched. Max wasn't himself, either. He usually thrived at these events, basking in attention like it was his life force. But tonight, he looked pale, almost sick. I tried to dismiss the unease. This night was about me, my hard work, my victory. Ryan's mood swings and Max's nerves could wait. I smiled through conversations with investors and colleagues, deflecting questions about the company's future with practiced ease. But then, as I stood near the buffet table, I caught them, Ryan and Max, standing too close, their voices low and urgent. I couldn't make out their words, but it wasn't the content that set off alarm bells. It was their body language. Ryan leaned in, his hand gripping Max's arm just a little too tightly, and Max looked like he wanted to bolt. My stomach churned as my mind raced to connects I didn't even know existed. Were they arguing? About what? I excused myself from the group I was with, casually making my way toward them. I didn't want to be obvious, but the closer I got, the clearer it became that this was not a normal conversation. Their voices were hushed, almost conspiratorial. Max was shaking his head, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides, while Ryan spoke in a low, commanding tone. When I stepped closer, they froze. Ryan straightened, posturing on a smile that felt like a mask, while Max turned away, running a hand through his hair. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Ryan responded too quickly, too smoothly. "Of course, sweetheart. Just going over some last-minute details for Max's new role. You know how he gets. Always overthinking." Max chuckled nervously, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, just work stuff," he muttered before walking away, leaving me alone with Ryan. I forced myself to smile and nodded, pretending I believed him, but inside, suspicion bloomed. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Ryan avoided me more than usual, busying himself with guests, and Max disappeared entirely. My mind kept replaying that moment between them, the tension, the way Ryan's hand lingered on Max's arm. It didn't sit right. Later, as the party wound down and the guests began trickling out, I caught a glimpse of Ryan's phone on the bar. He'd left it unattended while chatting with a colleague, and before I could stop myself, I picked it up. My heart pounded as I navigated to his messages, telling myself I was just being paranoid, that I wouldn't find anything. But then there it was, a thread of texts between Ryan and Max. At first glance, it looked innocuous, casual comments about work and the party. But the further I scrolled, the darker it became. Phrases like, "We need to be more careful," and "she's starting to notice," jumped out at me, each word a dagger to my chest. Then I found one that made my breath hitch. I can't keep lying to her. This is too risky. I dropped the phone like it burned me. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of it. What were they lying about? What was too risky? And why did it feel like I already knew the answer? Ryan returned before I could dwell too long. He smiled at me, his perfect, practiced smile, and wrapped an arm around my waist. "You okay, babe? You look a little pale." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his eyes. "Just tired. It's been a long day." He kissed my forehead, but the gesture felt hollow. "Go home and rest. I'll handle the cleanup here." I nodded, but as I walked away, I knew I wasn't going to rest. I needed answers. Back at home, the house was quiet, the silence pressing down on me. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the floor, trying to piece together the fragments of what I'd seen and heard. My mind went to Max, his nervous energy at the party, the way he avoided my gaze. My brother, who I had trusted with everything, who I had defended and supported through every mistake he'd ever made. Could he be involved in something that would hurt me? I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was there. Ryan and Max were hiding something, and whatever it was big. Bigger than I could have imagined. My hands clenched into fists as anger rose in my chest. I thought about the sacrifices I'd made for my marriage, for my family, for this company. And now, the two people I trusted most were conspiring behind my back. I couldn't sit in the dark, stewing over this. I needed to know the truth. Pulling out my laptop, I did something I never thought I'd do. I reached out to a private investigator. It felt extreme, invasive even, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. If there was something to uncover, I needed to find it fast. As I sent off the email and closed the laptop, I sat back, my heart still pounding. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to end. This was supposed to be my moment, my celebration. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something dark, something that could tear my life apart. I stared out the window into the night, my mind swirling with questions and fears. If Ryan and Max were betraying me, what else were they capable of? How deep did this betrayal go? And when I found out the truth, what would I do? The following morning, I woke up with a sense of unease that clung to me like a second skin. The private investigator I'd contacted had already responded, agreeing to take on my case, but it would take time to gather any concrete evidence. In the meantime, I decided to do my own digging. If Ryan and Max were hiding something, there had to be more clues, and I was determined to find them. Ryan was already gone when I went downstairs, his usual cheerful goodbye absent. He had an early meeting, or so he claimed. I sipped my coffee, staring blankly out the kitchen window, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. My mind kept replaying the scene from the night before, Ryan's tight grip on Max's arm, the cryptic texts, Max's haunted expression. I decided to start small, beginning with Ryan's home office. I told myself it wasn't snooping, it was self-preservation. His desk was immaculate, almost too clean, but tucked away in a drawer, I found a folder labeled personal. Inside were bank statements, nothing out of the ordinary, until I noticed transfers to an account I didn't recognize. The amounts weren't astronomical but frequent, enough to stand out. My gut told me this was part of the puzzle, but without context, it was just another loose thread. By the time I left the house, my head was spinning with unanswered questions. I drove to the office, determined to throw myself into work and push the thoughts aside. But the moment I stepped into the building, I felt the shift. The usual energy of my team felt muted. Conversations halted as I walked past. People smiled, but their eyes darted away too quickly. Something was brewing, and it wasn't good. I called a meeting with my senior staff, hoping to get a sense of the atmosphere. As they filed in, I noticed Max wasn't there. He was supposed to be shadowing me this week, learning the ropes of the business. His absence felt like a deliberate statement. "Where's Max?" I asked casually, scanning the room. One of the managers cleared his throat. "He called in sick this morning." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. But inside, the unease grew. Max never called in sick, not unless he was avoiding something or someone. As the meeting continued, I found myself distracted, my mind circling back to Ryan and Max. What could they possibly be planning? Why would Max involve himself in something that would retreated to my office and called Max? The phone rang twice before he picked up, his voice wary. "Hey, Erica." "Hey, heard you weren't feeling well," I said, keeping my tone light. There was a pause, long enough to make me wonder if he was about to hang up. "Yeah, just a stomach bug. I'll be back tomorrow." "Good," I replied. "We need to talk. There's a lot going on, and I need you here." Another pause, then a mumbled, "Sure." He hung up before I could press further. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I went through the motions, but my focus was elsewhere. That evening, when I returned home, Ryan was already there, lounging on the couch with a glass of wine in hand. He looked up as I entered, his smile too bright, too practiced. "How was work?" he asked, his tone casual. "Busy," I replied, setting my bag down. How was your day? Productive, he said, sipping his wine. Just tying up some loose ends. I nodded, watching him carefully. He seemed relaxed, but there was an edge to his movements, a slight tension in his posture. Max called in sick, I said, testing the waters. Ryan's expression didn't change, but I noticed the faintest flicker in his eyes. Really? Must be all that partying catching up to him. Maybe, I said, keeping my tone neutral. He seemed a little off last night, didn't he? Ryan shrugged. Max has always been a bit dramatic. You know how he is. I forced a smile, letting the conversation drift to safer topics. But inside, my suspicions solidified. They were hiding something and they were getting better at covering their tracks. The following morning, I received an email from the private investigator. Attached were preliminary findings, a summary of Ryan's financial activity over the past 6 months. As I opened the document, my heart raced. It confirmed what I'd already suspected. The account I'd found in Ryan's office wasn't his main one. It was offshore, and the transfers matched the dates on the bank statements I'd seen. The amounts were larger than I'd realized, totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the most damning detail was the recipient's name, Max. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. Ryan wasn't just hiding money, he was funneling it directly to my brother. For what? Blackmail? Bribery? My mind swirled with possibilities, each one worse than the last. That afternoon, Max finally showed up at the office, looking worse for wear. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that made him fidget constantly. I waited until the end of the day before pulling him into my office, closing the door behind us. What's going on, Max? I asked, cutting straight to the point. He blinked, feigning confusion. What do you mean? You know exactly what I mean, I said, my voice steady but cold. Ryan, the money, the lies. Start talking. Max's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, then closed it, struggling for words. It's not what you think, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Then tell me what it is, I demanded, crossing my arms. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you and Ryan are plotting something behind my back. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought he might come clean. But instead, he shook his head. I can't, he said, his voice cracking. I can't. I stared at him, anger and disbelief bubbling to the surface. Can't or won't? He looked away, avoiding my gaze. I'm sorry, he muttered before bolting out of the room. I sat there in stunned silence, the weight of his words and his refusal to explain, crushing me. Whatever he and Ryan were involved in, it was big enough to make Max, my brother, choose silence over loyalty. The realization cut deeper than I expected. They weren't just lying to me. They were betraying me together. As the day ended, I felt a renewed sense of determination. If Max wouldn't talk, I'd find another way to uncover the truth. Ryan and Max had underestimated me, but they wouldn't for long. Whatever they were planning, I'd be ready. And when the time came, I'd make sure they regretted it. The next few days felt like a test of my patience. Every interaction with Ryan and Max was a delicate balancing act, a performance where I had to pretend everything was fine while secretly plotting my next move. I knew they were lying, scheming, but until I had undeniable proof of their betrayal, I couldn't act. That knowledge gnawed at me constantly, a heavy weight I carried through every meeting, every conversation, every meal. Ryan was better at hiding it, carrying on as if nothing had changed. He still kissed me goodbye in the mornings and asked about my day in the evenings, but I noticed the small cracks in his facade. His phone never left his side, not even for a moment. He was more careful with his words, measured in a way that only made me more suspicious. Max, on the other hand, was unraveling. He avoided me at work, dodged my calls, and when I finally cornered him to discuss a project, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. I knew I had to push them, to force their hand somehow. But first, I needed to bait the trap. After consulting with my legal team under the guise of discussing a new partnership, I started putting safeguards in place. I quietly began buying out shares from minor stakeholders, consolidating my control over the company. I also made subtle changes to our operating agreements, ensuring that any major financial decisions would require my explicit approval. It was a calculated move, one Ryan and Max wouldn't notice until it was too late. In the meantime, the private investigator sent me another update. This time, it wasn't just financial records. It was surveillance photos, grainy but unmistakable. Ryan and Max meeting at a small cafe downtown, their heads bent close as they talked. The timestamps matched the dates of the suspicious transactions. One photo, in particular, made my stomach turn. Ryan passing Max an envelope, its contents hidden, but its implication clear. They were deep in something, and they thought I was too blind to see it. I decided it was time to confront Max again. I knew he was the weaker link, the one more likely to crack under pressure. I waited until late in the evening, when most of the staff had gone home, and found him in his office, hunched over his desk. He looked up as I entered, his expression a mix of guilt and dread. "We need to talk," I said, closing the door behind me. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Erica, I can't." "You can," I interrupted, my voice firm. "And you will. I know about the money, Max. I know about the meetings with Ryan. Whatever the two of you are planning, it stops now." His face paled, and for a moment, I thought he might faint. He stood abruptly, pacing the small office like a caged animal. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice shaky. "Then tell me what it is," I said, crossing my arms. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you and my husband are plotting to take everything I've worked for." Max stopped pacing, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I didn't have a choice," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt a flicker of hope. "What do you mean?" He turned to face me, his eyes filled with shame. "Ryan, he found out about my debts. The gambling, the loans. He said he'd help me if I did what he asked." "And what exactly did he ask you to do?" I demanded, my anger boiling over. Max hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "He wanted me to help him, take control of the company. He said it was the only way to fix things, to make sure we were all taken care of." I stared at him, disbelief and fury swirling in my chest. "So you betrayed me? Your own sister? For what? Max? Money? Power?" He flinched, his hands clenching into fists. "I didn't want to, Erica. But he's manipulative. He made it seem like this was for the best, like you wouldn't even notice." "Stop," I said sharply, cutting him off. "Don't you dare try to justify this." The room fell silent, the weight of his confession settling between us. I could see the guilt eating away at him, but it wasn't enough. He had made his choice, and now he had to face the consequences. "You need to fix this," I said, my voice cold. "You're going to tell me everything, every detail, every lie, every move Ryan has made. And then you're going to help me stop him." Max hesitated, his expression torn. "If I do that, he'll destroy me. If you don't," I said,
He stared at
stepping
me,
closer,
his
face
"I
pale
will."
and drawn, before finally nodding. "Feeny, I'll tell you everything." What he revealed over the next hour left me reeling. Ryan had been planning this for months, slowly positioning Max as his accomplice while siphoning money out of the company. The offshore account was just the beginning. Ryan's endgame was to fabricate a scandal, accusing me of financial misconduct, so he could push me out and take over as CEO. Max was supposed to corroborate the story, ensuring Ryan's victory. By the time Max finished talking, I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The man I had trusted, the man I had married, was willing to destroy me for greed. And my own brother had been complicit in the plan. I stood, my mind racing with possibilities. I had enough information now to start dismantling their scheme, but I couldn't act rashly. I needed to be smart, calculated, just like they had been. I turned to Max, who was still sitting there, looking utterly defeated. "From this moment on, you work for me," I said. "You're going to help me undo everything Ryan has done, and you're going to make this right. Do you understand?" He nodded, his voice trembling. "Yes." As I left his office, I felt a surge of determination. They thought they could outsmart me, but they had underestimated just how far I was willing to go to protect what was mine. The game had changed, and I wasn't going to lose. The next morning, I woke up with a newfound sense of purpose. Max's confession had left me shaken, but it also gave me clarity. I finally had a glimpse of Ryan's plan, and while the betrayal still stung, it lit a fire inside me. I couldn't afford to waste any more time. Ryan and Max had underestimated me, and that was their first mistake. I intended to make sure it was also their last. Max was already in my office when I arrived at work. He looked worse than the day before, like he hadn't slept at all. Good, I thought. He deserved to feel the weight of what he'd done. I shut the door behind me and leaned against it, crossing my arms as I stared him down. "Do you have it?" I asked. He nodded and slid a flash drive across my desk. "Everything you need. Financial transfers, meeting schedules, communications. It's all there." I picked up the drive, holding it between my fingers. This little piece of plastic felt like a weapon, sharp and dangerous. "And this will prove Ryan's involvement?" Max hesitated, then nodded again. "Yes. It's enough to at least start turning people against him." I narrowed my eyes. "You better hope so." I plugged the flash drive into my laptop and started reviewing the files. As I scrolled through spreadsheets and emails, my stomach churned. The scale of what Ryan had done was staggering. He diverted funds from projects, manipulated financial records, and even used Max to plant the seeds of doubt among my key investors. He had been systematically dismantling my credibility while positioning himself as the savior of the company. It was insidious, calculated, and devastatingly effective. But now I had the upper hand. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control. I looked up at Max, who was fidgeting nervously in his chair. "This is a start," I said, "but it's not enough. If I go to the board with this, Ryan will spin it. He'll paint me as paranoid or desperate. I need more." Max nodded quickly. "I can get it. Whatever you need, just tell me." I didn't trust him, not fully. But for now, he was useful, and I intended to use him. "Fine," I said. "You're going to stay close to Ryan. Play along with whatever he asks, but you report everything to me. Understood?" "Yes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I dismissed him, and as he left, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. My hands were shaking, but I clenched them into fists, willing myself to calm down. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The rest of the day was a balancing act. I went through my usual meetings and routines, but my mind was elsewhere. Every interaction with Ryan felt like a test, a game of chess where every move mattered. He was charming as ever, effortlessly slipping into the role of the supportive husband. If I had known better, I might have believed him. But now, every smile, every touch felt like a lie. That evening, I decided to push him. Over dinner, I brought up the company, pretending to seek his advice on an upcoming project. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine as he spoke with the confidence of someone who thought he had already won. "You've been under a lot of stress lately," he said. "Maybe you should delegate more. Let Max take on some of the workload. He's been eager to prove himself." I forced a smile. "That's not a bad idea. He's been stepping up lately." Ryan nodded, satisfied. "Exactly. You deserve to take a step back, Erica. Focus on yourself for once." The words were almost laughable coming from him. I nodded along, pretending to consider his suggestion, but inside, my resolve only strengthened. He was trying to edge me out little by little, and he thought I didn't see it. But I did, and I was going to make him regret it. After dinner, while Ryan was in the shower, I slipped into his office. His laptop was locked, of course, but I wasn't interested in his files. I was looking for something more personal. It didn't take long to find it, his journal. Ryan had always been meticulous, jotting down his thoughts and plans in a leather-bound notebook. He called it goal setting. I called it an invitation. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding as I scanned his notes. Most of it was mundane, but then I found a section labeled transition plan. My breath caught as I read his words, cold and detached. Remove Erica from CEO role. Timeline, 3 to 6 months. Max to corroborate financial misconduct. Secure majority board support. Transition to interim CEO, rebrand under new leadership. I closed the notebook, my hands trembling with rage. He had laid it all out, a step by step guide to dismantling my career and taking everything I'd built. And he thought he could get away with it. I put the notebook back exactly where I found it and left the office, my mind racing. This wasn't just about the company anymore. This was personal. Ryan wanted to destroy me, and he was willing to use my own brother to do it. But now I had a weapon of my own. His arrogance had left a trail, and I was going to use it against him. The next morning, I called a meeting with my legal team. Under the guise of preparing for an upcoming merger, I laid out my concerns in vague terms, careful not to tip my hand. I want to ensure we're protected from any internal threats, I said. We need to tighten our policies, especially around financial oversight. They agreed without question, and by the end of the day, we had implemented new protocols that would make it nearly impossible for Ryan to continue his schemes unnoticed. It was a small victory, but it felt like progress. Later that afternoon, Max came to my office, looking more nervous than usual. Ryan wants me to push the narrative with the board, he said. He's planning to call a meeting next week. I leaned back in my chair, considering this. Good, I said. Let him. Max blinked in surprise. What? Let him call the meeting, I repeated. It's time we started playing offense. Max nodded reluctantly, and as he left, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread. The pieces were falling into place, and the end game was approaching. I wasn't sure how it would all play out, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going down without a fight. The boardroom was suffused with tension as the meeting commenced. I sat at the head of the long, polished table, my hands folded neatly in front of me. The other board members shuffled their papers, casting curious glances at each other. They knew something was brewing, but they had no idea what. Ryan sat to my left, his posture relaxed, his expression composed. He even managed a faint smile, as though he were already savoring his victory. Max, seated farther down, couldn't seem to meet my eyes. Thank you all for being here. Let the Ryan began smoothly, standing to address the group. I called this meeting to discuss some troubling concerns that have come to my attention regarding the company's financial management. I stayed silent, letting him set the stage. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, and a murmur rippled through the room. Ryan continued, pacing with practiced ease. As you all know, this company has thrived under Erica's leadership. But in recent months, I've noticed irregularities in our financial records that I feel compelled to bring to light. These discrepancies, if left unchecked, could jeopardize our future. He turned to me then, his expression one of feigned concern. Erica, I think it's only fair to give you the chance to address these issues. The room went still as all eyes turned to me. I could feel their scrutiny, their doubt, but I refused to flinch. Instead, I smiled, calm and confident. Of course, I said, rising from my seat. Transparency is crucial, and I appreciate your dedication to the company, Ryan. He looked surprised by my composed response, but he quickly masked it. I continued, my voice steady. Before we dive into the specifics, I'd like to share some information of my own. I motioned to my assistant, who stepped forward and distributed thick packets of documents to each board member. These are detailed reports prepared by our auditors, along with supplementary evidence I believe you'll find enlightening. The room was silent except for the rustling of papers as the board members began flipping through the documents. I watched their faces carefully, confusion, shock, then outrage. Ryan's expression darkened as he realized what was happening. These documents outline a series of unauthorized financial transfers, I said, my voice sharp now. Funds were siphoned from company accounts into a private offshore account. The beneficiary of these transfers is listed as my brother, Max. Gasps echoed around the room, and all heads swiveled toward Max, who looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I pressed on, my gaze fixed on Ryan. More troubling, however, is the evidence linking these actions to my husband. Ryan not only orchestrated these transfers, but also used his position to manipulate financial records and spread false narratives about the company's leadership. Ryan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is absurd, he snapped. You're grasping at straws, Erica. None of this proves anything. I didn't let him derail me. The documents are authenticated, I said coolly. And if you'd like further proof, I'd be happy to share recordings of conversations between you and Max that corroborate these findings. His face paled, and for the first time, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. He knew I had him cornered, but he wasn't ready to give up. This is a smear campaign, he said, his voice rising. You're trying to cover your own mistakes by throwing baseless accusations at me. I folded my arms unfazed. The evidence speaks for itself, Ryan. But if you'd like to continue, let's discuss your transition plan. The room fell deathly quiet as I reached into my bag and pulled out his journal. I placed it on the table, flipping it open to the incriminating section. This notebook outlines a detailed scheme to remove me as CEO and install yourself as interim leader. It includes steps to fabricate financial misconduct on my part, using Max as a witness. You care to explain? Ryan's jaw tightened, his mask of confidence slipping. He looked around the room, searching for support, but the board members were stone-faced. Even his allies, the ones he'd likely hoped to sway, were glaring at him now. This is ridiculous, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You planted that. Then we can send it for handwriting analysis, I said, leaning forward. But I think we both know what it'll reveal. The weight of the room shifted, the balance of power tipping firmly in my favor. Ryan sank back into his chair, his defiance deflating. Max looked like he was on the verge of tears, but I had no sympathy for him. He had made his choice, and now he had to live with it. One of the senior board members cleared his throat. I think we've heard enough, he said, his tone cold. This level of misconduct is unacceptable. I moved to have Ryan removed from his position immediately, pending further investigation. Seconded. Another member said without hesitation. The motion passed unanimously, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Ryan was finished, his schemes exposed for everyone to see. As he was escorted out of the room, he shot me one last look, a mix of anger and desperation. But I didn't waver. He had underestimated me, and now he was paying the price. After the meeting, I returned to my office, letting the events of the day sink in. The company was safe for now, but the damage Ryan had caused couldn't be undone overnight. There was still work to do, relationships to mend, trust to rebuild. Max came to see me later, his expression sheepish. Erica, Don't, I said, cutting him off. I don't want your apologies. I want your actions. If you want to make this right, you'll cooperate fully with the investigation and stay out of my way. He nodded, his shoulders slumping as he left. I watched him go, feeling a pang of sadness despite everything. He was my brother, and some part of me still wanted to protect him. But trust was a fragile thing, and he had shattered mine. That evening, as I sat alone in my office, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. I had won this battle, but the war wasn't over. Ryan's betrayal had taught me a hard lesson. Trust is earned, not given. And from now on, I wouldn't let anyone take advantage of me again. The days following the board meeting were a blur of controlled chaos. Ryan's removal had sent shockwaves through the company, and though most of the board supported the decision, there were whispers, questions about how much I had known and why I hadn't acted sooner. I addressed these concerns with calm confidence, reassuring everyone that the company's future was my top priority. But underneath my composed exterior, I was still grappling with the emotional fallout. Ryan's betrayal wasn't just a professional attack. It was deeply personal, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever fully recover from it. Max had kept his word, cooperating with the investigation into Ryan's financial misconduct. He provided additional records and testimonies that helped solidify the case, but I couldn't bring myself to fully forgive him. Every time I looked at him, I saw the brother I had once trusted implicitly and the man who had betrayed me for his own gain. I knew he was trying to make amends, but some wounds cut too deep to heal quickly. Ryan, on the other hand, was far from finished. He might have been removed from the company, but he was still my husband, at least on paper. The divorce proceedings were underway, but he had already begun fighting back, using every legal loophole he could find to delay the process. His lawyers were aggressive, sending a barrage of demands and accusations my way. It was exhausting, but I refused to let him rattle me. If he wanted a fight, I was more than ready to give him one. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I found myself sitting in the kitchen, staring at a bottle of wine I'd opened but hadn't touched. The house felt eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made every creak and groan seem amplified. I thought about how different my life had been just a few months ago, how I had once believed I was building a future with someone who shared my dreams, my values. Now, that future felt like a distant memory, replaced by uncertainty and the weight of betrayal. My thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened it, I found Max standing on the porch, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, and he avoided my gaze. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone colder than I intended. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low. "It's important." I stepped aside, letting him in, though I wasn't sure why. He followed me into the living room, hesitating before sitting on the edge of the couch. I stayed standing, arms crossed, waiting for him to speak. "There's something you need to know," he began, his voice trembling. "Something I didn't tell you before." I tensed, already bracing myself for whatever revelation was coming. "What is it, Max?" He looked down at his hands, twisting them together. "Ryan, he wasn't just trying to take the company from you.
I'm aware.
He was planning
I
to ruin
said,
you completely." My
my
voice flat. That much was obvious. Max shook his head. "No, you don't understand. He had personal plans, too. He was gathering dirt on you, things he could use to discredit you publicly. He was working with someone else." My heart sank. "Who?" Max hesitated, then finally looked up at me. "Mom." The word hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. "Mom?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his expression pained. "She's the one who introduced him to the people who helped set up the offshore accounts. She thought, she thought you didn't deserve the company, that it should have gone to both of us." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The betrayal was too enormous, too incomprehensible. My mother, the woman who had raised me, who I had trusted implicitly, had been working with Ryan to destroy me. The room seemed to tilt, and I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "Why are you telling me this now?" I finally managed to ask, my voice shaky. "Because I was wrong," Max said, his eyes filled with regret. "I should have stopped her. I should have stopped him. But I was scared, and I let them manipulate me. I'm sorry, Erika. I really am." His words barely registered. My mind was racing, replaying every interaction I'd had with my mother over the past few months, searching for signs I'd missed. How could I have been so blind? "Get out," I said suddenly, my voice sharper than I intended. Max blinked, startled. "Erica, get out," I repeated, pointing toward the door. "I need time to think." He hesitated, then nodded, standing and heading for the door. As he left, I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. The weight of everything felt unbearable, but I knew I couldn't afford to crumble. If my own mother had betrayed me, there was no one left I could trust. I would have to fight this battle alone. The next day, I began digging into my mother's financial records, using every resource at my disposal. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for: transfers from accounts linked to Ryan's offshore funds into accounts under her name. The amounts weren't as large as what Ryan had funneled to Max, but they were significant enough to raise questions. And then there were the emails, dozens of them, outlining her role in connecting Ryan to the people who had helped him set up his scheme. The evidence was damning, but it also shattered what little remained of my trust in my family. My mother had chosen greed and resentment over loyalty, and she had almost succeeded in destroying me. Almost. I confronted her that evening, driving to her house and walking in without knocking. She looked surprised to see me, but She quickly masked it with her usual air of superiority. Erica, she said, her tone cold. What brings you here? I dropped a stack of printed emails on the table in front of her. Care to explain this? Her expression faltered as she glanced at the papers, but she quickly recovered. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, I snapped. I know everything. You and Ryan conspired to ruin me. You were supposed to be my mother, and you betrayed me. She stood, her posture defensive. I did what I thought was best. You've always been selfish, Erica, always thinking you're better than everyone else. I wanted to level the playing field. By destroying your own daughter? I said, my voice rising. How could you do this to me? She didn't answer, and I realized in that moment that I would never get the apology I wanted. My mother didn't see what she had done as wrong. To her, it was justified. I turned and walked out without another word. As I drove home, I felt an odd sense of clarity. My family had betrayed me, but they no longer had power over me. I had survived their worst, and I would come out stronger. Ryan, Max, my mother, they had all tried to take everything from me, but they had underestimated my resolve. And now I would make sure they never got the chance to hurt me again. The shareholder meeting was packed. Every seat in the conference room was filled, with several people standing along the back wall, eager to see what was about to unfold. The tension in the air was palpable, and for good reason. Word had spread about the recent shakeups within the company, and everyone was waiting for answers. I sat at the head of the long table, my expression composed, though inside, my nerves were humming. This was my moment to reclaim control, to expose the truth in front of everyone who mattered. Ryan sat a few chairs away, his face a mask of cool confidence. He wasn't going down without a fight. I could see it in the way he held himself, the way his fingers tapped idly on the table as if he had nothing to fear. Max wasn't there, which was for the best. He had played his part, but his guilt and anxiety would have been a distraction. My mother, thankfully, had chosen to stay out of sight entirely. That was fine. I didn't need her there to know I had already won. The meeting began with the usual formalities, reports on company performance, updates on key projects, but it wasn't long before the floor was open for questions. That's when Ryan made his move. Before we continue, he said, standing and addressing the room, I think it's important that we address the recent allegations made against me. While I understand the board's decision to remove me from my position, I believe it was based on incomplete and misleading information. A murmur rippled through the room. I stayed silent, letting him dig his own grave. I've dedicated years to this company, Ryan continued, his voice smooth and persuasive, and I would never do anything to jeopardize its success. Unfortunately, it seems personal vendettas have clouded judgment, and I've become the scapegoat for issues far beyond my control. He turned to me, his gaze sharp. Erica, I respect everything you've done for this company, but I think we owe it to the shareholders to have full transparency. Don't you agree? I smiled, calm and unbothered. Absolutely. Transparency is crucial. Ryan nodded as if he'd won some small victory. Then I'd like to propose an independent review of the company's financials to ensure that no one, myself included, has acted inappropriately. The room was buzzing now, shareholders whispering to one another. I could feel their unease, their confusion. It was time to end this. An independent review? I repeated, my tone steady. I think that's a wonderful idea, Ryan. In fact, I've already taken the liberty of conducting one. The murmur stopped, and all eyes turned to me. I stood, reaching for the folder I'd prepared earlier. Over the past few weeks, my team and I have been working with a forensic accounting firm to investigate recent discrepancies in our financial records. The results are illuminating. I walked to the center of the room, placing copies of the report in front of each shareholder. This document outlines a pattern of unauthorized financial activity originating from accounts controlled by Ryan. It also includes correspondence between Ryan and external parties detailing his plans to undermine the company's leadership. Ryan's composure faltered, his confident mask slipping. This is a setup, he snapped. You're trying to frame me. I ignored him, continuing to address the shareholders. But that's not all. During the investigation, we uncovered additional evidence of collusion involving external parties and even attempts to create a false narrative about my leadership. One of the shareholders, an older man with a stern expression, leaned forward. Is this evidence verifiable? Absolutely, I said. The forensic team has authenticated every piece of data. You'll find their certification attached to the report. The room was silent except for the sound of pages turning as the shareholders reviewed the documents. I could see the disbelief and anger in their expressions, and I knew I had them on my side. Ryan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is a smear campaign, he said, his voice rising. You can't prove anything. I turned to him, my smile razor sharp. Actually, I can. And I'd be happy to present the recordings of your conversations with your accomplices, if necessary. His face turned pale, and for a moment I thought he might actually sit back down. But instead, he turned to the shareholders, his desperation clear. She's lying. This is all fabricated. One of the shareholders stood, his expression cold. I think we've heard enough. The evidence is overwhelming, and it's clear that Ryan's actions have jeopardized the integrity of this company. I move to permanently ban him from any future involvement in the organization. The motion was seconded immediately, and within minutes, the vote was unanimous. Ryan was finished. As the security team escorted him out of the room, he turned to me one last time, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. You'll regret this, Erica, he said, his voice low and venomous. You think you've won, but you haven't. I met his gaze,
When the doors
unflinching.
closed
Behind him.
Goodbye, Ryan.
The room was still for a moment. Then, one by one, the shareholders began to applaud. It wasn't loud or celebratory, but it was enough to make my chest swell with relief. I had done it. I had exposed the truth, protected the company, and taken back control. After the meeting, I returned to my office and closed the door, letting out a long breath. The weight I had been carrying for weeks felt lighter, though not entirely gone. There were still scars, still pieces of my life that needed rebuilding. But for now, I allowed myself a moment of peace. Max came by later that evening, looking hesitant. I heard about the meeting, he said. You really did it. Yes, I said simply. He shifted awkwardly, his guilt written all over his face. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I just want you to know how sorry I am. I studied him for a moment, searching for sincerity. Actions speak louder than words, Max. If you want to make things right, prove it. He nodded, looking relieved. I will. After he left, I sat by the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. Ryan and my mother had tried to destroy me, but they had failed. I had faced their betrayal and come out stronger, more determined than ever. I wasn't naive enough to think this was the end. There would always be challenges, always people trying to take what I had built. But now, I knew I had the strength to face them. My family had underestimated me, but I would never underestimate myself again. The aftermath of the shareholder meeting settled over me like a strange, hollow victory. Ryan was gone, his schemes exposed, but the cost of that victory lingered in every quiet moment. I spent the following days wrapping up loose ends at work, ensuring the company was firmly back under my control. The board was satisfied, the shareholders reassured, but the emotional weight of what had transpired didn't fade as easily. At home, the silence was almost unbearable. Ryan's belongings were gone, shipped off as part of the divorce proceedings, but the ghost of his presence lingered in every corner. The empty space in the closet, the cold side of the bed, constant reminders of how thoroughly my life had unraveled. For years, I had built a life I thought was solid, unshakable, only to watch it crumble in the face of betrayal. Now I was left with the pieces, unsure of how to rebuild. One evening, as I sat in the living room with a glass of wine, Max knocked on the door. I considered not answering, but something compelled me to let him in. He looked better than the last time I'd seen him, less pale, more composed, but there was still a nervous energy about him. I won't stay long, he said as he stepped inside. I just wanted to check on you. I'm fine, I said, though the words felt like a lie. What about you? Are you holding up? He nodded, fidgeting with the hem of his jacket. I'm trying. I know I have a lot to make up for. You do, I said bluntly, setting my glass on the coffee table. But that's on you, Max. I can't hold your hand through it. I know, he said quickly. I wanted to say thank you for giving me a chance to make things right. I looked at him, searching for sincerity in his eyes. He seemed genuine, but I wasn't ready to let my guard down. Don't thank me yet, I said. Prove it. He nodded, and after a brief, awkward silence, he left. As the door closed behind him, I felt a pang of sadness. Max was my brother, and some part of me still wanted to protect him, to forgive him. But trust, once broken, wasn't easily repaired. It would take time, if it could be repaired at all. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into work. The company became my sanctuary, a place where I could focus on rebuilding rather than dwelling on the past. I met with department heads, reviewed every ongoing project, and implemented stricter financial oversight policies. My team rallied around me, their loyalty a balm to my wounded pride. I had weathered the storm, and now I was determined to steer the company toward a brighter future. But the personal wounds were harder to mend. My mother hadn't contacted me since our confrontation, and I didn't expect her to. Her betrayal cut the deepest, a fissure in our relationship I wasn't sure could ever be bridged. Every time I thought of her, I felt a mixture of anger and sadness. She had chosen greed and resentment over her own daughter, and while I knew I didn't need her approval or support, the loss still stung. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I found an envelope on my desk. It was unmarked, the handwriting unfamiliar. I opened it cautiously, my heart racing as I unfolded the letter inside. It was from my mother. The letter was short, almost clinical. She didn't apologize, of course she didn't. Instead, she tried to justify her actions, claiming she had only wanted what was fair, what she thought Max and I deserved equally. She painted herself as a victim, someone forced into a corner by circumstance. I read the letter twice, searching for even a hint of remorse, but there was none. I crumpled it in my hand, anger bubbling to the surface. How dare she try to rationalize what she had done? How dare she refuse to take responsibility? I tossed the letter into the trash, refusing to let her words take up any more space in my life. That night, as I sat alone in my quiet house, I made a decision. I couldn't keep holding on to the pain, the anger. Ryan, Max, my mother, they had all hurt me in ways I couldn't have imagined, but I couldn't let that define me. I had fought too hard, endured too much, to let their betrayals dictate my future. The next morning, I called a therapist. It wasn't an easy call to make, but it felt like the right one. I needed help processing everything that had happened, and I needed to find a way to move forward. The first session was awkward, uncomfortable, but by the end of it, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could heal from this. As the weeks turned into months, I began to feel more like myself again. I took small steps, reconnecting with old friends, picking up hobbies I had abandoned during the chaos. I even started going to yoga classes, something I'd always told myself I didn't have time for. Slowly but surely, I started to rebuild not just my life, but my sense of self. One afternoon, as I sat in my office reviewing a proposal, my assistant knocked on the door. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her tone hesitant. "A Mr. Ryan Evans." I stiffened at the name, my stomach twisting. "Send him in," I said, my voice steady. Ryan walked in, looking every bit as polished as ever. He had the audacity to smile, as though we were old friends catching up. "Erica," he said smoothly, "you're looking well." "What do you want, Ryan?" I asked, keeping my tone cold. He sighed, feigning regret. "I just wanted to clear the air. I know things got messy between us, but I thought maybe we could find some common ground." I stared at him, incredulous. "Common ground? You tried to destroy me." He held up his hands, as if in surrender. "I made mistakes, I admit that. But we were partners once, Erica. I'd hate to see all that history go to waste." I stood, crossing my arms. Our history ended the day you betrayed me. And if you think I'm going to forgive you or give you another chance to weasel your way back into my life, you're delusional." His smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. "Fair enough," he said, straightening his jacket. "I just thought I'd try." "Don't," I said firmly, "and don't come here again." As he left, I felt a strange sense of closure. Ryan had been a part of my life for so long, a shadow over everything I had built. But now, that chapter was finally over. I had survived his betrayal, and I had come out stronger for it. In the quiet that followed, I looked out the window at the city's skyline. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. And no one, not Ryan, not my mother, not anyone, the day I reclaimed my company and my life from the chaos that Ryan, Max, and my mother had tried to unleash. Sitting in my office, I glanced at the plaque on my desk. Erica Reynolds, CEO. It was a simple thing, but it represented everything I had fought for. The company was thriving again, our profits higher than they had been in years. The storm had passed, and in its wake, I had rebuilt something stronger. That morning, I had a meeting with the leadership team to unveil a new initiative, a bold expansion into international markets. As I stood at the head of the table, presenting my vision to a room full of executives, I felt an energy I hadn't felt in years. The anxiety that had once gripped me in these rooms was gone, replaced by confidence and clarity. My team listened intently, their support palpable. They believed in me, and more importantly, I believed in myself. After the meeting, I returned to my office, letting the adrenaline settle. My assistant knocked on the door, poking her head in with a smile. "You have a visitor," she said. "Shall I send them in?" "Who is it?" I asked, glancing at my schedule. "A woman named Clara," she replied. "She says it's about a partnership opportunity." I nodded, curious. "Send her in." A few moments later, a woman in her mid-50s entered the room, her presence commanding yet warm. She extended her hand, and I shook it firmly. "Ms. Reynolds, thank you for seeing me on short notice," she said. "I'm Clara Nguyen, CEO of Everbright Ventures." I recognized the name immediately. Everbright Ventures was a powerhouse in sustainability, a field I had been eager to explore for our company. Clara sat down, and as she began outlining her proposal, I couldn't help but admire her sharp intellect and passion. Her ideas were innovative, her strategy sound. By the end of the meeting, I knew we had the potential for a groundbreaking partnership. "Clara," I said as we wrapped up, "I'm impressed. Let's move forward with this. I'll have my team draft the initial agreements." She smiled, a genuine warmth in her expression. "I'm looking forward to it, Erica. I think this could be the start of something great." As she left, I felt a surge of excitement. This was exactly what I had envisioned for the company, a chance to innovate, to lead. It felt good to be making decisions that weren't rooted in damage control, to finally be looking ahead instead of cleaning up the messes left behind. That evening, I hosted a small gathering at my home, a celebration of the new partnership and the progress we had made as a company. My closest colleagues, a few loyal board members, and some friends I had reconnected with over the past year filled the space with laughter and conversation. It wasn't a grand affair like the parties Ryan used to throw, but it felt genuine, a reflection of the life I was rebuilding. As I moved through the room, chatting with guests and enjoying the atmosphere, I spotted Max standing near the fireplace, a glass of sparkling water in his hand. He looked different, more composed, less burdened. Over the past year, he had worked hard to regain my trust, taking on smaller roles within the company and proving his commitment. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. I walked over to him, and he straightened, his expression tentative. "Hey," he said, "this is a nice party." "Thanks," I replied. "I'm glad you came." He nodded, glancing around the room. "You've really turned things around, Erica. The company, your life. I'm proud of you." I studied him for a moment, searching for any sign of insincerity, but there was none. "Thank you, Max," I said. "And I mean it, thank you for the work you've put in. It means a lot." His shoulders relaxed, And for the first time in a long time, I saw a glimpse of the brother I had grown up with. We talked for a while longer, and though there were still wounds that hadn't fully healed, I felt a sense of hope. Maybe, in time, we could truly repair what had been broken. Later that night, after the last guest had left, I sat on the back patio, the cool evening air wrapping around me. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a reminder of how far I had come. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayals, the battles, the moments when I wasn't sure I could go on. It had been a long road, but I had survived. More than that, I had thrived. I took a deep breath, letting the stillness of the night settle over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. My life wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, still scars, but it was mine. And that was enough. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, ready to dive into the next phase of the expansion plan. As I walked through the building, I felt a sense of pride. This company was more than just a business. It was a testament to my resilience, to my ability to rise above the chaos and create something meaningful. In my office, a new plaque sat on the shelf behind my desk, a gift from my leadership team. It read, "To our fearless leader who turns challenges into opportunities." I smiled, running my fingers over the engraved letters. It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world to me. As I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, my phone buzzed with a new email. It was from Clara, confirming the next steps for our partnership. I replied quickly, my excitement bubbling over. The future felt bright, full of possibilities. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. I had faced the worst and come out stronger. My trust in others had been shattered, but my trust in myself had grown. And that, I realized, was the most important thing of all. As the day unfolded, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for the pain I had endured, but for the strength it had revealed in me. My story wasn't just one of betrayal and loss. It was one of perseverance, of rebuilding, of hope. And as I looked out over the bustling city below, I knew that this was only the beginning. The best was yet to come.